I'm Erica Gonzalez with the Women's Media Center, and this is WMC Talks, a bi-monthly conversation where we bring powerhouse women to the front and talk to them about the work they're doing to change the narrative. And with us today, we have Annie Leonard, who just is a force behind a new book called Protest, very timely. And Kirkus Reviews calls it an excellent introduction to the power of public dissent. So I just want to read a little bit about Annie. And Annie, if you can feel free, welcome to add in anything else, because your bio is just super impressive. I mean, here she's been a leading proponent of sustainability and a critic of consumerism. She created the animated film, The Story of Stuff, which describes the life cycle of material goods. In 2014, she became the executive director of Greenpeace USA, which is, talk about an organization that has led so much protest and for the well-being of so many people. And you've worked on coalitions around incinerator alternatives, the story of cap and trade. You're an advocate with another powerhouse woman and a co-founder of the WMC, the Women's Media Center. So I'll pause that and allow folks to hear from you about any other work you'd like to highlight.
Well, you forgot that I'm a big fan of the Women's Media Center, too.
Oh, thanks. Thanks.
You guys do such important work, and I'm just so grateful you exist.
Thank you. So why don't we jump in to the book? Obviously, the topic is very timely, but what inspired you to put this book project together? Was there a specific thought or a particular protest that made you think, hey, we need to kind of collect all of these essays and put this book together?
Well, thank you so much for asking. And the book here is so beautiful. I hope people will see it. I just want you to have a little glimpse inside, because that sort of explains a little of why I did it. There's all of these photographs and stories and essays by protesters. And the reason I did it is that over the last decade, I've been increasingly concerned about a crackdown on protesters, about a vilification and criminalization of protesters. And I am a huge fan of protest. And the reason I'm a peaceful protest, we're talking about nonviolent peaceful protest, I'm a huge fan of it because I've used it for decades and I've seen it work. I've seen it work in moving issues forward. I've seen it work at pressuring decision makers to do the right thing, or giving cover to decision makers who want to do the right thing and need that cover. I've seen it work at building community, at honing our commitment and strengthening our sort of social fabric of standing together. I've seen it work at elevating issues that were previously sort of out of sight and out of mind onto the public agenda. In so many ways, I personally know that protest works. And the data backs it up. I mean, protest absolutely works, especially when it's peaceful. And so over the last decade, I was getting concerned about the increasing vilification and criminalization of protest. And of course, this is nothing new. I mean, especially our Black, Brown, and Indigenous brothers and sisters are very, very familiar with being vilified and criminalized and attacked for their protest. But it's reached a new scale more recently, especially since Trump was reelected. Attacks on protests are just so widespread. We can talk more about that. But what really inspired me to do this book was being concerned about protest. I looked at some research about how people in the United States view protest, and I saw this stunning study that showed that over 90% of people in the United States value the right to free speech and protest. They see it as democratic and they see it as American. So I'm reading this data that over 90% of people across the political spectrum value protest. And then I'm watching the mainstream media and elected officials call the Black Lives Matter protesters terrorists or enemies of the states or thugs. I mean, it's just terrible. And so I was thinking, there's a gap there between what people think and how they're responding to protest right now. And what I realized is that people in the United States value protest, the right to protest and free speech and dissent, in the abstract as a democratic right, and in history, but they don't value it in the contemporary moment. And that's always been true. I mean, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Gandhi,
Right.
Boston Tea Party, all these people were vilified at the time. So I decided to write this book with my best friend, Andre Carruthers, and that was a fun experience. But the book seeks to humanize protesters, to show people, show the readers who these people are that protest and why. And I have to say, I don't think you can read it and not just be full of admiration and love for these people that are standing up so courageously. So I wanted to, that's a long answer. I wanted to push back on that vilification and criminalization of protesters.
Great. You talked about a gap in how people see protests in a given moment in history, and then how it's looked at later in decades later. And you mentioned BLM. Is the gap racial? Is it where people have a sense that certain people have more of a right to protest, or it looks legitimate when it's done in certain ways? I mean, like in addition to what you mentioned before, I mean, I've seen protesters labeled communists, infiltrators from outside, trying to like troublemakers. So is that your finding in terms of like how people, what basis are people rejecting protests and what it looks like?
Well, absolutely. There's racial and gender discrimination pretty much and everywhere across society. So that is definitely a factor. And historically, that's been even more of a factor. As you know, we all know during the Black Power movement, the Civil Rights movement, there was COINTELPRO that attacked Black activists. The very fact that they had COINTELPRO and that they did it secretly implies that they knew it was not a good thing, right? They had to do it secret. It is just totally wide out in the open now. I mean, you have people gunning down people of all races and classes. Of course, Black people are disproportionately targeted by racialized police violence, but you now have white people, all different kinds of people
Right.
being gunned
Right.
down at rates never before. You have the president of the United States making videos of him dumping excrement on peaceful protesters' heads. I mean, it's reached a new level in terms of who it's targeting. It's also reached a new level in terms of it's every part of the government now is part of this attacks on protesters. And it's reached a new level in that the democratic guardrails, the protectors of our constitutional rights that protesters should be able to rely on are being dismantled. And so it's a very scary situation. It's especially scary because we need protests now more than ever, because
Right.
of three interrelated issues. One is that the windows to avoid worst case climate scenarios are closing, and we're not seeing action commensurate with the science. So that's really sort of an existential emergency for the planet. Then we see, excuse me, our hard-won progress on racial, social, gender, environmental progress is being dismantled. So protecting our multicultural, egalitarian communities, like we need to protest that. And then third is that we've had a terrifying democratic backsliding in this country, and we stand to lose the rights to demand a better world. This historian Timothy Snyder is quoted in the book, and he said, "If you protest now, you'll be able to protest later." Whereas if we sit on the sidelines
quote.
now, we're in big trouble because we're going to lose some core tools that people have relied on to build a better society.
That's such a great quote. And how are people responding to your book? Because I also know that there are, like, for those of us who've been protesting, we know that it's a playbook and it's a necessity. It's not optional, and it's expressing our agency, and it's strategic, as you mentioned before. Sometimes it can give somebody cover or somebody a nudge. But I also hear from folks that are like, they're fatigued, they're just tired. They wonder if it's effective or if we need to refresh in some way. So I'm wondering how your book speaks to that, and also how it kind of reminds people that this is not like a dated tool.
Well, we've just finished 2 months of traveling around the country and doing book events, and we did an unusual book tour because we combined the book events with trainings by the Freedom Trainers. If you haven't checked out the Freedom Trainers, go online. They have loads of information available, and the Freedom Trainers are just a fantastic network of people helping communities get ready for the authoritarian breakthrough that we're experiencing now, and sort of, as you said, refresh our approach to protest. And it's been really fantastic. We thought the book would be more for what I call the protest curious. It's very inviting. It's really beautiful. Patagonia Books did a wonderful job bringing these protests that we include in it to life with photos and quotes and artifacts. And we don't use in-group jargon and protester and technical terms. We try to be as inviting as possible, lower the bars to entry. And we thought it would be people who were just curious, not sure. And it's been interesting. There's two kinds of people that have really come out for these events. One are those protest curious that are people who come and say, I've never protested before, but this is getting really bad. I feel like I need to. How can I start? But the other are very, very experienced protesters who see this as sort of like a family album or validation of what we've been doing. Like, it's a really joyful, hopeful book. And so it's been very well received, and we're so grateful to all these communities we've gone to, and we're going to keep going to different places. And the tour is available on theprotestbook.com. Theprotestbook.com is it. But in terms of the refresh, we do need to refresh our protest tactics. And I'm so glad you said that, that the kinds of protest tactics that work in a democratic context are different than the kinds of protest tactics that work in an authoritarian context. And I know that the word authoritarian is something that none of us expected to use about our country, and it's still very uncomfortable for many people to say it. And there's debates of, is it an authoritarian breakthrough? Is it, what's going on? I'll tell you that there's a number of global entities that study the states of democracies around the world. I cite them in the book. They say that the United States is no longer a democracy. And that's hard to hear because democracy is so much part of our self-identity. And also, the sun is still shining and the strawberries are still at the market. And, I walk my dog, it doesn't seem any different. But the kinds of criteria of a authoritarian, we've met them all. And so we have to come to terms with the fact that we have had what's called an authoritarian breakthrough. And we are now in the period of an authoritarian consolidation. And one of the reasons it's so jarring, besides the fact that everything looks normal, is that we're used to thinking of authoritarian breakthroughs as like tanks going down the street and the president or prime minister are fleeing the palace, these kinds of things learn about in history. But around the world, the way that authoritarians come to power now is very different. They call it a slow motion coup, or what academics call this is competitive authoritarianism. Is that you see it in Hungary, in India, in Turkey, in the Philippines, like all over the place. In the United States, authoritarians come to power through electoral means, and then once they get in power, they dismantle the democratic guardrails and they set it up so they don't have to leave. And anybody who thinks that's not happening, just look that Trump is selling Trump 2028 hats and shirts and stuff. And Steve Bannon said the reason they put ICE in the TSA places in the airports was to test if the public will take it for the polls. So this is very serious. And so anyway, back to the different kinds of protests.
Yes.
In a democratic context, we can use the kinds of protests that we have all grown up on. Petitions, lobbying, advocacy, public education, peaceful protests, marching in the streets, voting. Those are all the kind of protest tools we can use in a democratic context. In an authoritarian context, those don't matter. Do you think Trump matters if we do any of those? He doesn't care if we do any of those things. I mean, I use him broadly, the anti-democratic forces. They don't care if we do those things. They aren't as effective. The marching in the streets is still effective in some ways. It makes our discontent visible. It grows the movement. Many, many people joined No Kings who've never joined a protest before.
Yes.
It builds our sense of community.
Yes.
It feels good to be surrounded by people who also know this is wrong. It elevates the issue onto the agenda. It makes the people that are watching and are concerned know they're not alone. There's lots of reasons that it is still important to fill the public square. But in a democratic context, those tools don't work. They won't ultimately work. So what we need is a different kind of protest that's called non-cooperation. And the best way to think about this is that in the Democratic context, you can move a person. I think about when Biden first announced his presidency for his candidacy for presidency, his climate record was terrible. And I was working with Greenpeace at the time. We had a report card. He had like a D something. It was terrible. And we followed him around with signs, and we published this report card all over. And we had wealthy Democratic donors call him and tell him that's not good enough. And we did all the things activists do. And he moved. And he ended up championing the strongest, still not strong enough, but the strongest climate policy in US history. And that's what happens in a democracy. In an authoritarian, they're not movable. So we have to target the parts of society that are propping them up. So a good metaphor that the freedom trainers and many others use that I think is so useful is, imagine an old sort of Roman building where you have like a roof and all these columns. The roof is the anti-democratic regime. And all these columns are the parts of society holding it up. The media, the legal profession, academia, the entertainment industry, the military, business, the faith community. There's all these different columns. And so what people need to do now is think about, what column are they part of, or can they influence? And how can we move those columns that are supporting the administration into at least neutral, but preferably into withdrawing support? So they call it non-cooperation, or withdrawing support. So think about the business community. Target capitulated to Trump's demands to remove DEI in all of their programming. Costco didn't. Everybody I know doesn't shop at Target anymore and shops at Costco instead. Disney canceled Jimmy Kimmel at the behest of Trump. Millions of people within a week canceled their Disney subscriptions, including my family. So those are ways we can withdraw our support from entities or sectors of society that are supporting Trump. And this is why the Women's Media Center is so important, is that so many voices on the media are capitulating, or even worse, complying in advance. The worst thing we can do right now is anticipatory compliance. The best thing we can do is exercise our right to free speech and dissent, and do it en masse so that we have strength and security in numbers. So it's a different approach to protest, and lots of people are doing it. So I'm feeling very hopeful.
Yeah. And as you were talking in terms of that, how can we inflict economic pain? I just think about like the Selma bus boycott, where it was like, it wasn't, there's a comedian, Dulce Sloan, who makes a lot of social commentary. And she says, at the end of the day, you got to mess with their money, and that grabs attention. So it was, but also like, how do you sustain that kind of work is a question. But you were saying something before about the way protests, throughout, the protest has to be tailored for the times, right? It has to retool because we're in a different space. And it made me think about the uprising in Chile several years ago, and how the protests turned into, and it was about economics, it was about the government, et cetera. But the way people were showing up to those protests, especially the women, not only the women, but just also being mindful of like care and defense. So at some point, like the protesters who were getting injured by rubber bullets and other stuff were showing up at hospitals and then getting picked up by the police, which had been very militarized. So what a lot of people started doing was carrying like medical aid backpacks on them so that they could treat people on the spot until they got them to a safer place or someone who was trustworthy, as opposed to taking them where they were going to be nabbed. So I think there's a lot to be learned about where, unfortunately, too many people and countries have had practice on this, and there's a lot to be learned from women. And I would love to hear about some of the women that are covered in your book. And also we've talked about, you've brought up how like there are moments in protest history that are lesser known, and would love for you to talk about those moments too.
Walter, it is no secret that in successful protest movements, women are in charge. Women are leading. It's absolutely clear for so many reasons. And I do want to talk quickly about what you said about the sort of network of solidarity and support That's really important. You saw it in Chile. You saw it in the Montgomery bus boycott. That was over a year of people walking to work. Taxi cabs gave free rides. Churches bought station wagons they called rolling churches and drove people. People volunteered to watch each other's kids because they were taking so long to get back to work. In fact, like there's lots of roles here. So if somebody is not comfortable going out into the street or is not in a financial or other position to be able to boycott a company or do something else, there's lots of roles. I mean, look at Minneapolis. There
Yes.
were carpenters who drove around and fixed the doors that had been kicked in by ice. There were nurses that provided people who were cared for people who were scared to go to the hospital. There were people who met folks getting out of detention with a warm blanket and soup. There were lawyers who drove around and did legal work on people's front porches so they wouldn't have to leave their house. There's so many ways to be involved in this movement. There's as many ways to participate as there are people in the world. So if you feel like you're not the kind of person to march in the front with a sign, or you're not ready to take the rubber bullet, no problem. There's so many ways to be involved. But women, my God, the women, I get so excited. So this book has 42 protests from around the world, many of which are led by women. And then it has, what I love are these 13 guest voices of protesters from different eras and different issues, because I really wanted the readers to get to know these people. Some you already know. There's Jane Fonda, Dolores Huerta, Jane Fonda, the co-founder of the Women's Media Center, Dolores Huerta, Rebecca Solnit. But there's some you might not know. Like there's this wonderful woman who's an indigenous woman from Ecuador, Namante Ninquino, and she's fighting against oil and gas corporations that are trying to destroy the forest. And actually, Jane Fonda and I got to go visit her last year. So we spent time in the rainforest with her, and it was absolutely fascinating being in the Ecuadorian Amazon with her for a couple of weeks. And what I noticed is as she walked around through the forest and lived, there was no barrier between where she ended and the forest began. I mean, they are forest dwelling cultures and people. Like the forest is them. And so what she says, she's trying to protect the forest. She says in her absolutely incredible essay, she says that continuing to live as a Waorani woman is an act of protest. Her existence is an act of protest.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful one. Another woman is from upstate New York, Sandra Steingraber. I love her too because she is a scientist and a poet. So she has both of those brains.
Right. Yeah.
She is also a cancer survivor, and she likens her struggle with cancer and what she learned through that with the kind of skills she needs to be an effective protester, and says that being a cancer survivor it's her superpower as a protester. There's lots of women in here that are just will warm your hearts.
It's amazing. I wanted to go back to something you said earlier about the protest curious. And so would love to hear more about, I guess from the book and then people you've interacted with. You mentioned that some people just feel like I can't stand on the sidelines, but I'm interested in hearing more about what is the decision making, like what have been when they said that they couldn't stand on the sidelines and had to get involved, like what were some of the particular policies or things that they saw play out on TV that they felt like, okay, I need to kind of show up in some way.
God, there are so many things. I mean, for sure, the ice abductions just crosses such a line of morality and decency. I mean, it's just so offensive. And any woman cannot watch a child being ripped out of the mother's arm and the mother be taken away and the child screaming without just knowing something is deeply, deeply wrong in this society. So the ice abductions, the Epstein files, for sure, just the gross corruption, the just absolute blatant corruption, the gutting of social services and support for low-income people while enriching the richest people already in the country, all of these things. But there's one thing more than anything else that makes people ready to protest, and it's not what's happening externally. It's not an external event. It's if they have friends who are also protesting, if they have a community. And there's actually was some studies done in the civil rights movement. Remember when the Northern college students went down to the South and some of them were tragically killed?
Yes.
There's some research done about what was the commonality with the ones who stayed, even after some of their colleagues were killed. And, when I first read about this, I thought, maybe it was they had parental support or they had the economic means. So it turns out that most important criteria for if they stayed or not was if they had friends there, if they had a sense of community. It can be scary stepping into active resistance alone. And the great thing is we don't have to do it alone. The number one question I get is, I'm concerned, but I'm only one person. What should I do? I said, stop being only one person. join,
Right.
join an organization. And there are so many wonderful organizations, from local
There.
visible groups to faith-based groups. So many of them. And there's a great place to find them is on Mobilize. It's a app that has
Yeah.
lots of different protests and events. And if you don't find a group that feels quite right to you, just get some friends and start one. But the number one thing is don't be alone. Like, we really need each other right now.
Yes, yes. I want to switch gears a little bit into what we started talking about, just what you brought up, media narratives, because that's obviously something that's important to the Women's Media Center. We see women as leading shifts and transformative thinking, expansive thinking. So you mentioned before how I wonder, I just wanted to get your thoughts. I wonder if some of the shock from going from, democracy, I say that in quotation marks because it hasn't functioned for everyone, right? And going to authoritarianism and the way people envision that in a very sort of dystopian way. I wonder if some of over the years and decade, the storytelling, the way that that's been projected in television and movies has sort of is a part of why so many people are shocked, because the sort of journey of that is pictured as very short term and very as opposed to insidious and in an electoral framework. So I would love your thoughts about that, and then we can get into another media question.
Well, I do think that the way that authoritarians have taken over has changed over time. It's not just that the stories misrepresented it, it's that it's changed. Long, long ago, authoritarians did take over through overnight coups, and it's really changed. And the media narratives haven't kept up. And the media has also not named the elephant in the room. Why are the newspapers and the media not having every single day, here's where we are on the authoritarian breakthrough schedule? This is very well studied and documented that there's 3 stages of an authoritarian takeover. The first is the authoritarian preparation, where the authoritarian builds a base. And just as I described these, think about, have we seen this? The authoritarian builds a base, does some crazy things to test what the public response will be, and starts to put their people in a few institutional places of structural power. That's the authoritarian preparation. Then the authoritarian breakthrough, where the authoritarian comes to power. In our case, our country elected a president who said, I will be a dictator. If you vote for me, you will never have to vote again.
Right.
This was not a secret what was going to happen.
Right.
And then after the authoritarian breakthrough comes the authoritarian consolidation. And that's the period we're in right now. And in the authoritarian consolidation, the authoritarian solidifies capture of all the entities that should rein them in, changes the laws so they have immunity that they can do what they want, removes safeguards on them, and then ultimately gets rid of the electoral process by which they and their cronies can be removed. That's what's happening. If that gets finished, it's going to be very, very, very hard to get back. I had dinner recently with a woman from Chile who was telling me some of the stories there, that for decades they had a 10 o'clock curfew. That's hard for us to imagine, but it's not that impossible anymore when you look at what's happening. So one of the things the media could do much better is tell the truth and platform voices that tell the truth. And when those voices are retaliated against, back them up, because the vast majority of the country is not getting accurate information about what's happening on climate what's happening on immigrant rights and deportation, what's happening on women's rights, and what's happening on the dismantling of our democracy. And it's alarming, and it's really malpractice from the media.
So I agree. And how do we hold media? I mean, we're the consumers. How do we hold media accountable? Like, for example, I'm very vocal on social media and having been a journalist, I'll say, well, you completely left this off. Like you did, I'll kind of dissect how a story was unfolded. But you're absolutely right. There should be an authoritarianism watch. And somehow it's still very like back and forth on specific issues, or like the latest thing that he said, so as a public, and I also see it's wonderful to see so many independent platforms that are just kind of like going to the core of this, so but just I guess maybe for people who are going to be listening to this this conversation, what are ways that they can raise a critical eye or critical questions when like cable legacy is unfolding a story, and it's how would someone be able to detect that they're not getting a full framework of what's going on?
Okay, so like if you're breathing, you're not getting a full framework of what's going on. Like no, he is, because it would be a full-time job to track all this stuff down. It's just grueling because our mainstream media is so asleep at the wheel. It's just it really is criminal. Excuse me. A couple of things. One is, yes, search out different perspectives and different independent media. I think it's much better to support independent media than pay for these ridiculously terrible broadcast channels, these cable channels. I don't subscribe to any of them. When I go to my mother's house, she watches CNN all day. I'm like, you are learning nothing. Like you're learning literally nothing. So the same thing over and over, and it's not the relevant news of the day. So I don't subscribe to any of those, and instead I subscribe to online news services of independent journalists. Like look at who's funding the journalist entity, and we need to put our money where our hearts are and support independent media. Absolutely. If you haven't seen the new documentary about Amy Goodman, Steal This Story.
I want to.
Oh my God, it's so inspiring. Go see Steal This Story, please, and make a donation to Democracy Now! That's one thing. Another thing is when you cancel your subscriptions to the other places, tell them why. And you can write them a letter, or what's even better is if you post on social media and tag them so that others see that you are doing this. When millions of people canceled their Disney subscriptions, Disney changed. They did it about face. So cancel. This is what we mean by non-cooperation. Don't give your money or your eyeballs and attention to entities that are not helping. So support independent media for sure. Another thing is we need to fight the big mergers. The more that these big corporations merge, first of all, there's the fear that they will capitulate even more because they are trying to get FCC approval, and so they will, obey in advance.
Right.
Anticipatory compliance. But the other thing is, the more they merge, the more we have a sort of blanding out and lack of diversity of perspectives that we are exposed to. So there's some really good campaigning against the big media mergers. There's a nonprofit organization called Free Press. I tell people it's the good Free Press, not the bad one. You can find it online, and they have a campaign against the Paramount merger. So check that out. People can contact their attorney generals. That's a very useful thing, and say, we oppose the merger of large media conglomerations, and please don't allow them, because it actually violates our right to free information. So there's lots of ways you can get involved and do the work to find independent media that we trust.
Thank you for outlining all of those ways. And for folks listening, I mean, these are steps that you can take from your phone, your computer. It's if each one of us takes an action, you'd be surprised about the collective force of that. Don't assume that I'm just one person and that's not going to have an impact. So Annie, congratulations on your book. I hope everyone reads it. And I look forward to the Women's Media Center getting out this conversation to our lists and promoting it. and you know, hopefully we can stay in touch and see where we're at and see where, you know, I love that this comes with a curriculum that's attached to a curriculum. And we just need more of that for people to understand that like protest has to change for these times.
Right. It's true. I mean, you said our democracy has never fully worked. I like to say we never had really a democracy. We had the promise of a democracy. Our democracy was unjust. It was unfair, but it was relatively stable. We sort of protesters knew the grounds in which we were making a cost benefit analysis about, you know, a risk assessment about protesting. And all of that is out the window right now. And it's really a scary time. The way we will get through it is by lots of people watching out for each other. And
Yes.
one last thing is that we talked about how protest has to change. This is not the moment where we need lots of brave people chaining themselves to railroad tracks or something like that. The kind of protest that's needed now, in many ways, is safer because it's the non-cooperation is you can do it from your own house. You cancel your subscriptions. You don't buy at the shop. You if churches are capitulating, you tell them I'm not going anymore. A lot of it is mass non-cooperation as opposed to individual acts of heroism. So there's really no reason not to join in.
Exactly. Well, Annie, thank you for all the work that you're doing. It's critical. I mean, and thank you so much for inspiring us with this book.
And check out the book. It's really inspiring.
Thank you, Annie.
Thank you. Like,